Barack Obama was at a Democratic fundraiser in Chicago recently, and one of the topics that he brought up was climate change. Now, once again, this is an area where, at least in his rhetoric, Barack Obama gets it right. Now, he talks a little bit about climate change, and it's clear that he understands the threat, at least to some extent. He says, "We also know that the climate is warming faster than anybody anticipated 5 or 10 years ago, and that the future, in part, is going to depend on our willingness to deal with something that we may not be able to see or smell the way you could when the Chicago River was on fire, or at least could have caught on fire, but is in some ways more serious, more fundamental." And so he understands that while there's still some debate over climate change in the media, at least, it is a serious threat to America. And so he gets points, at least for the rhetoric. But then he goes on to talk about how the government can actually do something about climate change and his willingness to work with people who have differing opinions, and that's where he loses me at least a little bit. He says, "If I've got somebody who has a different approach to dealing with climate change, I don't have much patience for people who deny climate change, but if you've got creative approaches, market-based approaches, tell me about them. If you think I'm doing it the wrong way, let me know. I'm happy to work with you." I personally think we're a couple of decades past "I'm happy to work with you" in this country. Now, he understands, or at least seems to understand, the severity of this threat. But then there's this huge gap between that understanding and his approach to actually dealing with it as the most powerful man in the country and possibly the most powerful single man in the world. We need to deal with this threat. We are running out of time. Recently, you might have noticed that the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere went above 400 for the first time. I recently just, for fun, I guess, watched An Inconvenient Truth, and they talked about, look out if it goes above 300. That movie apparently is now very dated since we've gone 30% above that. This is a serious problem that will require a serious governmental approach to fixing it. And look, the government, when it actually acts on these sorts of important worldwide global issues, can actually do something. You know, there was the hole in the ozone layer. Internationally, we fought against the chemicals that were causing it, and that now is not nearly as much of a problem. Acid rain in America, massive problem. Actually very similar in terms of what you need to do to regulate it, although I suppose a little bit easier, but this was something that was difficult at the time to deal with. Thankfully, acid rain, not nearly as much of a problem in America as it was in decades past. So this is something that we know we need to deal with. He at least acknowledges that we need to deal with it. But you can't simply say, people who have differing opinions on climate change, we can sort of split the difference and half wreck the environment? No, at some point you need to speak out, and you need to say you need to use stronger words, I guess I would say, than "he doesn't have much patience for climate change deniers." These people are those who occasionally in the Senate and the House want to work with him on dealing with the economy and dealing with healthcare and issues like that. These are not necessarily rational or reasonable people. He needs to speak out against them so that in the next election, the next series of elections, we can get them out of office. Because, unfortunately, so long as the House is in control of the Republicans, the chance that any sort of serious legislation that could fix parts of the problem when it comes to climate change, carbon sequestration, things like that, they're simply not going to pass the House, as extreme as it is right now. So we need to do what we can, not just when the election is ongoing. We need to do what we can now to get it to be an issue that people will care about going into the next election. That's the only way that we're going to clear the House and the Senate of these climate change deniers and get some actual headway on fixing the problem with the climate. So I guess I'll give him some points for speaking out, keeping in the news. I'm not missing, of course, the fact that this was spoken at a fundraiser. That's probably the only reason he brought it up in the first place. So he gets, I guess, a C, but more needs to be done.